All right, I think we can get started. So, Connor, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Yeah, let me share my screen. So what I wanted to bring up, we had a customer file an issue where in certain situations, the span duration is hidden. It's cut off from the window. And there's also some extra metadata with that. I don't think it's a huge issue, but it was recently escalated by the customer. And so I wanted to get all of your opinions about if there's something, good alternative of where we can place this information. I'll show what I'm talking about. So this is here in Tempo where we're visualizing traces. And so each of these little sections is a span. There's some metadata associated with it. And that will either be placed on the right or left of the span in this right pane. So it will show the duration as well as, the service that this is coming from. There's also a couple other, places that this is being shown, like on the top bar, it shows the total duration for that span. If you click into a span, it'll also show the duration here. This right pane can be, extended. And then some of that information is also here in the left pane, like the service that the span is coming from. And so the issue in particular is that the customer with their data, a lot of times the span duration is cut off. This is kind of a small screenshot. It's hard to see, but you'll see that you only see kind of the seconds of this span. Just based off of kind of like the relative lengths of the different spans. So in the example that I have here, the root span is very long compared to the other spans. So there's plenty of space to show the duration. But in some situations, or like if you really shrink the screen down, then you can get them to cut off. Or also when you hover, this extra data is hidden as well. And so I wanted to talk through a couple of alternatives of where we could place this data. And yeah, do you have any questions up to this point?
I have one question, which is how is it determined if the label is on the left or the right of the bar? Is it just like programmatically decided, or is that a setting?
Yeah, it's programmatically. I haven't looked at the code super recently to remember exactly how it's working, but I think more or less it looks where there's available space. So for example, here, these spans start right at the beginning. You think of this as like 0 seconds, and so that places them on the right. Something that's interesting is if you actually look in the inspector, this root span, it is also rendering this extra data to the right, but it's completely cut off. So if I expand this out, I don't know if you're able to see, but that's absolutely positioned there as well, the 782 milliseconds. You might be able to see kind of on the middle right of the screen that it's hovering, showing where that is, although the user can't see it.
I have one more. I think I asked you this before over Slack, but it's been a couple of weeks, so if you can refresh my memory. What are these typical lengths of time, like to have like hundreds of milliseconds to 100th precision? Is that typical, or can it range like completely wide? Like could we have like millions of milliseconds, or are we generally looking at like what it looks like a 3 to 5 digit measurement?
Yeah, that's pretty standard. And so depending on what the length is, it'll change the units. So it could be in milliseconds. I think in this example, I have some longer ones, and so it automatically shows them as seconds, for example. And I think the code will do that, up to hours or days. It'll use the units so that only a couple digits are shown.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Do you know exactly, sorry, just to kind of jump in there, do you know exactly like how long the string is? Like what's the maximum amount of space that the string can be?
I mean, the actual duration, right, is pretty small. This is probably the longest that it would be, where it's like 5
Okay.
numbers and then, 2 characters. The other
Okay.
kind of variable part of this, though, is that we also show the kind of like the service that the span is coming from,
Okay.
and that could vary a lot.
Got it.
Yeah, I have a question there just on the thing that is shown when you hover.
Mhm.
Is it possible to get that information also with a keyboard?
I think it's added as an area label. So if you, I'm not totally sure. So maybe if you, I don't know if you can tab over the spans. You can also click to expand. And so if that is keyboard accessible, then the information is also shown there. I'm not totally sure.
Is there a reason why you only show it on hover? Is it because it's not really interesting or to save space or?
Yeah, I think it's, my guess is because it's duplicated. So you'll see here, like this has front end driver, driver service, find nearest. That information is right here in the left pane as well. So it might help kind of contextualize it when you're looking at a specific span. But I'm not sure the reasoning why it's only shown in hover. My guess is to keep it less cluttered. Awesome. If there aren't any other questions, I think I'll kind of
I
walk
have
through
one
a
more
couple.
question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
awesome.
I
No,
have
no.
one question. So in terms of the use case, do you, is how for, say, for example, the first service you have front end dispatch, is it
Mhm.
usually, does it usually take up the entire span? Like how common is it for one of the kind of like lines or one of the services to take up the entire span on the UI?
Yeah, in my experience, the first span pretty much always takes up the entire duration, the entire width. But the data can vary wildly depending on the service and kind of like the shape of the customer's data. But in my limited experience, yeah, it is pretty much always the full width. And then for the most part, there's enough room to render out the duration. I think it's kind of an edge case, in my opinion, what this customer is experiencing. And so, yeah.
And just to kind of, sorry, just to kind of like
Mhm.
back up on that a little bit. So you said it is common, say, for example, for the first, should I call it a trace? I don't know if I'm using the correct language, or the first
Yeah, so-
span to take up the entire width.
Yeah, each kind
Okay.
of like row is a span.
Okay, so it's common for the first row to take a first span to take up the entire width. But then what about the customer's case is kind of, would you consider an edge case there?
The fact that the child spans also take up almost the entire duration. We don't have a great screenshot here.
Okay.
I can't remember if they added another screenshot in the issue. No, they didn't. My guess is that takes up the whole width. And so the only available space they have is a little bit right there. So that's kind of where the app decides to display that.
Got it. And just one final question, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
For the first span, is it critical that they have the one that takes up the full width? Is it critical that they have the kind of like same type of metadata available on that span? Or is that span kind of like for the use case kind of outside of that? Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll see here on this top bar, it also shows the some
Got it.
timestamps. And so you can see,
Okay.
1.74 seconds, and I click into it. That's the exact duration. So you're able to get that
Okay.
information pretty quickly for
Okay.
the root span.
Okay. And could they do that for the kind of child spans? Like, is that type of functionality available for the child spans if you click in?
Yeah, so you can click into any of them and see all of this data as well.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so that's why my first proposed solution is, we don't do anything. We say this information is already available. It's pretty quick
Mhm.
to be able to see it. I've talked a little bit with my team, and then went back and forth chatting with a couple of you in the UX channel. There are a lot of kind of pros and cons to each of the proposed solutions. So just kind of give an overview of what those might be. So first, do nothing. They can see that information. Doesn't seem, in my opinion, like something that there's a great solution to. And some of the other ideas were put the duration inside of the span instead of the left or the right. One issue with this is it would overlap potentially with the log markers, which I don't think there are any on this example, maybe here. Okay, yeah. So in here, you'll see some of these small lines that corresponds to logs or kind of other events that happen during that time. So that would be one downside of putting it inside the span. And then there are also, these really short spans that wouldn't be wide enough to show that. Second proposed solution is add it beneath, like Grafana does. This wastes a lot of vertical space, and in a lot of these traces, we have tons and tons of spans, so there's a lot of scrolling as is. And in the majority of cases, we do have a lot of good horizontal space that we can use. This is what Grafana looks like, and how they have the information below each span. So that's one alternative. And for context, this visualizer is forked basically from Jaeger. And I think Zipkin does something pretty similar. So this seems like the most common layout, what we currently have. So I would be adding it beneath it. One idea would be to add the duration to the left pane. So right now we already have kind of like the service name and some data about each span here in the left pane. We could add the duration as well to there. Kind of moves the data outside of this context, because on the right pane, you kind of have this sense of how long the spans are relative to each other, and you have that information there. And it's also kind of nice to see it in relation to kind of like the total duration of the trace. But I think we could move that information here to the left pane. The left pane can be resized so you can show that information. So that's one alternative. Maybe remove all of this data from here and add the duration to the left pane. What else? One idea is to make the duration hover, in that right now, basically, this left pane sits over the right pane. So see if I can size it down small enough. So you'll see here, when I hover it over it, the service name is hidden underneath the left pane. One alternative is, like bump up the Z index of this so that it will appear over anything to the left. The way that I have my screen set up right now, won't be able to quite show it, but you can imagine that on a smaller screen, or depending on how long the data is on either side, that could potentially overlap. So I think if I really shrunk my screen down, see that if we hovered or made the information on the right side appear above the left, it would cover over that information. Not a perfect solution there either, but one alternative. I think those were kind of the main ones that we had discussed and that my team had brought up. Do you have any ideas, alternatives, or any that stand out as being worth investigating more?
I do have an idea, and it's based on the notion that we do adjust the units when the number starts getting too big, which is like, I guess I can frame my idea as a question, which is, why do we have to start the line flush left with the right hand pane? Did that make sense? So if you don't mind going back, so like there's your little divider line between the two panes, and all of your your graphic starts flush left. So like, can we just like give it 14 pixels of padding or whatever you might need? You might need a little more than that, just so that those numbers aren't cut off, and then have the tooltip hover over. So it's sort of like a combination of the like, changing the overlap so that the right-hand pane comes to the front, but then also just buying yourself some space and starting a little further to the right, instead of flush left with that pane divider.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah, I think
and everyone feel free to chime in on that. That's just what occurred to me. I'm not married to that idea.
I have a question about it though, because would that be dependent, like the amount of space or padding you would need? Would that be dependent on kind of like the size of the service name? And it sounds like, or the length of the service name. And like, we're not sure, because it's kind of like user defined, like how long those service names would be. So you could probably have something pretty wacky. I'm assuming not wacky,
Well,
but you know, something
yeah.
really long.
Well, what I was thinking actually was that the service name, since it only appears on hover, that we still would just hover it, but it would come to the front of the pane, of the service and operation pane. But that you're just buying yourself space with that padding for the time measurement. So the time measurement would always show, and would, you know, we could reserve what is like, you know, a reasonable amount of space, because we do have a fair amount of horizontal space, but then on hover, it could overlap on the left-hand pane if it needs to. It's not elegant, it's not great. So I'm very open to other ideas, because it's like a combo approach.
Mhm.
I have a question, because that issue is basically around the longest time span, or basically the time span hidden for the really long lines, let's say. Isn't it possible to just basically for the first line to overlay from the left side, overlay the total span duration basically on top of the line?
Yeah, that would be possible to do it there as well. One potential drawback is that oftentimes there are these log lines, these little markers on the spans, which show a log associated with that span, and so that could overlap.
Yeah, but if you would like place that, we don't have annotations turned on that Zoom call, so I think I cannot, or I can annotate. Okay. If that would be just something like placed here, like a pill with the total number, we still have some space here available, and that would basically like solve the issue.
Yeah, the logs could appear at any point along the span. Yeah, I think that's an alternative solution, as well as placing it inside the span.
Yeah, so I might have misunderstood something here, but the top span is basically what sets the units for the whole thing.
Yeah,
So
pretty
the
much
issue is
everything
not-
is relative.
Yeah. So the issue is more like, in this case, the 4 ones beneath the top span, the next 4 spans. If they would be wider, like if another span would be as wide almost as the top span.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the main issue, because the root span, you can see the length based on the total length here. The more pressing issue is if one of the child spans is, you know, think of it, if it's pretty much the same width as the root span, then there's going to be an issue, because there's not going to be space on either side, unless we reserve space, like Amy mentioned, on one of the sides to always show the duration.
Yeah, that's the case that is shown within the issue, that is not shown here, what you displayed, that basically on the issue, the 2 spans below are basically as long as the main one. So yeah, but then again, why, if we know that we cannot display that information, and that can be of various lengths, I guess like 14 pixels doesn't buy us more, so it should be then around at least like well, much more, because it can be in thousands of milliseconds, for example, or something like that, I guess. So if we know that we cannot display that because it's basically overflows this part, why just not move it to the right and place it on top of that line. There are no informations on top of that line, basically.
One
So
of
I
the
guess,
things
like,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Lucas, you can finish.
Yeah, because it seems like all of those additional improvements are super interesting and super relevant, but the escalated issue is basically around displaying this specific information, this specific context. So, so how to solve that issue the shortest way, basically, that's the question. And then to have a discussion about overall improvements to that if they are possible.
So one of the things that I think we have to be really careful about if we overlay the label is the contrast. So like the fifth one down, the light blue one, is going to fail all of our accessibility checkers if we overlay the label. So I don't know if we would do it in sort of like an enclosed filled box or something, but we'd have to be really careful about that because it looks like we don't necessarily have, there's a whole palette of colors, right, that are being used here. And I'm not sure how it's determined which ones get which colors, but we have to watch that.
Yeah, we have this sort of max contrast text color. So basically, depending on the background color, it takes white or black.
Okay.
That should be sort of helpful, I think.
Yeah, we can add an underlay or like a pill, like make a pill out of that, basically. Why not? It doesn't have to be just like the text moved to the right. It can be some additional styling beneath, because that text will not also fit the height of that bar and it will look ugly. So additional visual things really need to be there, I guess, to make it more pretty and readable.
I have a completely different question. I know you shouldn't sort of give feedback on the stuff you haven't asked for, but what does the colors mean? Is it like, do they have a meaning, the different colors?
Yeah, my understanding is that they're associated with the service. So like green is the front end, you know, this blue is the database, red is Redis. And I think they're just automatically assigned.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe also the alternative to the pill, and something that doesn't require much of the work, is for the time spans that do not fit the time span label within the viewport. Maybe, yeah, we could just like place the time spans here, basically. And if we know that we can fit the time spans, then we place them next to the span. That's not super elegant, but at least it surfaces the information.
Yeah, let me double check the screenshot. Okay. Yeah, in this case, they have plenty of space in the left pane, so they're able to show
They
that
could be
there.
like here.
I mean, I think that we are saved a little bit by the fact that you can resize the panes. So like, even if they have it and it's cut off, they could always kind of like drag it out a little bit to see, you know what I mean? Like to see if the left pane is getting cut off, they could drag it out, because at a certain point, you know, definitely what they're saying now is problematic. But if they just have this on like a teeny tiny screen and are trying to do kind of crazy things, it's like looking at Excel, right? Like you can only make your columns so small and you can only handle it so many different ways before it's just kind of on you as a user to make it visible to yourself. So I think that that's why I'm leaning towards, you know, a combo of what I said and what Lucas said, which is this left-hand label and just using up some of that real estate over there. Or does the left-hand pane get like really deeply nested, or is this more typical of like 6 or so levels deep?
I mean, it can depend a lot depending on the service that the customer has. I haven't seen anything like super deeply nested, but I'm sure there are cases where it can happen.
Sure. Okay.
Trying to think. I don't think either of these will scroll horizontally. If this is relevant. Okay, so it sounds like two of the solutions that we're leaning towards investigating would be showing it inside of this the span with some extra styling so that it has enough contrast and doesn't look awkward, just kind of like being placed right over it, since the span isn't tall enough to show all of that information. Another would be adding some padding so that the duration is always shown inside the left pane, which would effectively kind of like shrink everything down, since all of the spans are spaced relative to each other, and just having some extra space here. And I think one alternative that we mentioned as well, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Do we need this information here associated with each span? Would it work just as well to include the duration here in the left pane? The service information is also duplicated. I think that could also be a relatively simple solution to implement. And because you can resize the left pane pretty easily, I think if we're not losing any information by removing these and putting them here, from an implementation standpoint, I like that one the most.
I agree. I had been thinking about that as well. Like, we're showing the information twice, right? So like, is it necessary? The one thing I would say is maybe on hover, you see there's a bit more contrast on the right side, because it's kind of like the white. And I wonder if on hover, you could have that same kind of contrast, say, for example, with the service name, because it's in gray, but maybe on hover, you could do that. Yeah, it works when you're going over that, or kind of hovering over the server and operation pane, but maybe that kind of, having it go across both of the panes. That sounds like it may be a pain to implement. I don't know, but just throwing it out there.
Mary, do you mean if, sorry, I was just clarifying, Mary, do you mean if you hover on the span, it would highlight the service name on the left-hand pane? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and make it, change it to white, just to have that bit of contrast to show, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it'd make that a lot
Sorry.
easier to see the information. And I don't think it'd be too bad, because we already have it going one way, right? Like, if I hover over the left, the right gets highlighted. And I think doing it the other way would not be too bad.
Yeah, I somehow like feel that this is, of course, like that information is duplicated. But if you can imagine that someone is working on solving some kind of a problem, and they need to go through many lines of those, and they want to identify the specific service or the specific like a error or code that happened. And if they're far away to the right with exploring those spans, then just like hovering there and having that information within the reach of the focused eye, let's say, this might make a huge difference, especially on a bigger screen. So it might be like thousands of pixels away if you want to check which of those spans is related to which of the elements. So like here, it's just like I know we can guide that by hover, but basically it's a huge jump for the eyes still to make. So I think there's a reason for that information to be attached to on hover there.
Okay, no, I think that makes sense. I think one thing we haven't explored is the idea of like a tooltip or some kind of like a tooltip on hover. I don't know if that's something you thought about at all, Connor.
Yeah, so in this screenshot, it's kind of hard to see, but I'm hovering over this span and there's a tooltip above it. I think that's an alternative as well. It does look kind of weird when you have the tooltip and the info to the right. Yeah, that is another alternative as well. What if we, duplicated all of the information and we included the duration on the left panel as well? So you still have it contextualized, but in situations where it's cut off, you can pretty quickly look over to the left. And I think of those situations where that kind of edge case is popping up, those are already spans that are pretty close to the left pane. And that might be an easy way to see the duration as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a good and fast solution, especially for now.
like it as well.
Can you say that again? Just so I can get it in the notes correctly too.
Yeah, just duplicating the duration and including it inside of the left pane. So probably adding it, with a pipe and then showing it after the service name.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm drawing and you cannot hear me.
We're just silently watching you draw.
What is happening? What
I
is
feel like
happening?
Amy and I had funny looks on our face.
Yeah, so I just wanted to confirm that we are talking about like placing those labels either to the right side or to just basically next to the other labels already there. So like two options to either have it like here or have it like here duplicated. We are already duplicating the information, so sounds like a reasonable thing to do.
My initial idea.
Yeah.
My thought is to have it here on the left, be easier to implement, and then if it's on the right and you're kind of absolutely positioning it, I guess you could, just like have a spacing element in between. My guess is that if you shrink it down, then you're hovering, the duration, hover over, overlay over that, or the other way around. So I think just having it on the right of the service name would be the simplest.
So yeah, so I guess what you're saying also is that yeah, maybe I was thinking too much flex box, and then it would be easier to just like push that element to the right side, but I guess it's not done with flex box, I guess.
Yeah, I think, let's see. I guess these are links. I don't know why they're, can you click on? I don't know why those are links, but yeah, it's just text inside the same element. I guess you could make it flexbox and then space them out that way. So I guess implementation wise, yeah, probably not a problem. Anyone have any opinion either way?
Yeah, but it seems like having them here is also a good option for start, and it covers the escalation issue as well by just enabling to see the time span for each of the spans, like lines, basically. So yeah, but that's definitely like an opening for a bigger discussion around how to make that nicer and prettier, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. I think, go ahead.
You go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, I think obviously from my perspective, it being simpler to implement is great. I think it will reliably show the information. I'm leaning towards, implementing this, and then we can revisit this in the future, kind of like adding additional context to this as well. So for a while, we were maintaining a fork of Jaeger, more or less, so that we could have this trace visualizer, but we're kind of drifting more and more away from that. So we can keep considering, like ways that we can innovate or just like change what that was, since we are no longer tied to the original source code of, like how Jaeger did things.
And Connor, just one more thing. So I do think if you could hover over on the right side, just one of the spans. Yeah. So I think something like, and Lucas, I'm not sure if this doesn't jive with what you were saying, but I'm wondering if you want to have it look the same way in both places, just for consistency. So say, for example, you would even kind of, you would really just, I mean, here you have kind of like the front end. I mean, I don't know if you could have it look exactly the same way. You probably wouldn't need the front end, kind of like the name of the service, I guess, appended on the left side. But if you would have the numbers and then the name of the service, just for consistency's sake, if something like that works.
Yeah, so having them in the same order.
Yeah. But then you would, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Lucas.
Yeah, although that is hard because the like the alignment shifts from the right side to the left side, and also that the order changes. I think like there's also a reason why the front-end selector is there, like with the double semicolon, because maybe that allows you to copy that and then to use it elsewhere to also look for that specific log element. So yeah, the consistency is great, but then you would have to rewrite the selector as well if you want to copy that in a different place to look for things.
Can you explain that a little bit? So you're saying that they would
Yeah, you can
copy kind of the
yeah, you
front
can-
end selector?
Yeah, you can probably right now, you can just like select the whole string starting from front end and ending with the customer and paste it somewhere else when you are looking through the logs or doing whatever else. And if we just present it with this like a nicer front end label, then you miss the double colon selector, which basically means it is
Okay.
harder to copy and paste the text.
Got it. Thank
But
you.
I don't know if that's really the case. I'm just like looking for reasons that it was implemented this way, and maybe that was a
Okay.
part of some other issue or feature request. So yeah, but I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Definitely.
As far as I know, I don't think there's any specific functionality tied to kind of like that formatting. One idea that comes to mind is having the duration on the right might make it a little bit more easily scannable. You know, like keeping the service and the operation together, I think makes sense because those are, you know, like similar pieces of information. And then I feel like it might look a little bit weird putting the duration in between them. That's my initial thought.
And if we change order, then when we if we have the front end HTTP get customer first and the milliseconds after that, basically on hover, the milliseconds label will have to jump to the right, or so that will make that information shift from one place to another. Because right now that information about the service is appended on hover to the duration. And if we want to keep the order of things, then we would have to, at one of the cases, shift the time span element when we display the service name element, basically. So we cannot keep order without moving on elements on hover, basically. I don't know if I'm clear or on what I mean.
Yeah, I think that made sense. You know, if we want them to be in the same order, we'd have to flip one or the other.
Yeah.
Kind of discuss. So we probably don't want to change this order. And yeah, I think it would not work too well if we flipped this order either. Do we have any other feedback or ideas regarding this? Just to summarize, you know, the idea of showing the duration simply here appended to this information, so it's visible in both places. You can still see it contextually, but in those kind of edge cases, it's very easy to see the info as well.
I think that sounds like a good, simple solution. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, so are we done for today?
I think that was
With
the
that topic?
only item.
Cool. Because like it's like you, Connor, and us, the UX team. Connor, are there any things we might improve with that session for the future to make it more valuable for you?
No, I mean, I thought this was awesome. Came with a problem, had a couple initial ideas, but I think it was really, really effective to be able to chat through it, get all of your ideas on that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So, and thank you very much for presenting that and having that during the feedback session. And I guess we will see you all during the next week's feedback session.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. This is
everyone.
great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.